The dawn of the new year 1945 came slowly. The snowstorm raged fiercely, delaying the awakening of the new day. The troops of the 5th Guards Army in the first days of January were preparing for a major offensive operation, which went down in the history of the Great Patriotic War under the name of Vistula Oder, and which was carried out by the troops of the 1st Belarusian and 1st Ukrainian fronts, with the assistance of the troops of the left wing of the 2nd Belarusian front and the right wing of the 4th Ukrainian front. Huge forces of the Red Army were concentrated on the 500-kilometer front. Only in two fronts, the 1st Belarusian Marshal Zhukov and the 1st Ukrainian Marshal I. Konev, there were 16 armoured and 4 tank armies, 2 air armies, not counting individual tank, mechanized cavalry corps and other special units and formations directly subordinate to the fronts and the Supreme Command. Such a large strategic grouping of our troops has not yet been created on the Soviet-German front for a single offensive operation. And it is not accidental after all. Between the Vistula and the Oder, the Nazis created 7 defensive lines to a depth of 500 kilometers, turning many large cities into fortresses. It was simply impossible to break through such defenses with small forces. And our troops managed at the second stage of the operation to provide an average daily advance of 25 kilometers. And of course, the combat actions of our regiment in the scale of such a grandiose operation, it is, as they say, a drop in the ocean. But as from small streams form a full-flowing rock, so from private, at first glance, insignificant successes of companies, battalions and regiments in battles with the enemy formed the victorious operations of armies and fronts. On the eve of the offensive, commander of our army, General Azjadov, held a meeting with the commanders of divisions and regiments. Our 97th Guards Rifle was represented at this meeting by a new commander, appointed instead of General Antsiferov, who had left for another place of service guards, Colonel Anton Prokofievich Garin. In the middle of the large room, where we entered, stood a massive box with sand, on which in the appropriate scale depicted the terrain of the area of the upcoming combat operations of the army, with the most important landmark cities and towns, railroads and highways, forests and forests. From corner to corner through the entire box, looping, ran a blue ribbon of the Oder, which we had to force. When the commanders reported on the readiness of formations and units for the upcoming offensive, Zhadov listened attentively, only occasionally clarifying individual details. Having made a few remarks to the speakers, he set each compound tasked to break through the enemy defences. After some silence, looking closely at those present, the commander concluded, "Artillery will have to work hard for themselves and for aviation, because according to the prediction of forecasters, the weather will not fly." Late in the evening of January 10th, I received a call from Guards Colonel A.P. Garin and ordered to take the regiment to the line of Mokra, Zhiznia by 9.00 on January 11th. There was no time left, and I ordered Major Takmovsev to send staff officers to the battalions and immediately begin to prepare the march. The matter was complicated by the fact that we did not have enough transportation to bring up all the ammunition at once, and even the presence of several trophy vehicles did not solve this problem. I involuntarily remembered the hard times of the 41st and 42nd years, when the regiment often had only 30 to 40 rounds of ammunition for each soldier, 1 to 2 grenades and 10 to 15 mines and shells for each mortar and gun barrel. At that time, all this could be carried on one's back. Now our industry uninterruptedly provided the front with everything necessary, and only one full ammunition regiment weighed dozens of tons. Having consulted with the division command, I allowed my deputy on the home front, Guards Major I. Goncharov and the head of the regiment's artillery, Guards Captain N.N.Ko, to attract 30 to 35 submarines of Polish peasants from nearby villages for the transportation of all the ammunition. The villagers willingly agreed to help us. There were even more volunteers than it was required. And a large transport with ammunition accompanied by a platoon of machine gunners followed our regiments moving deep into Germany up to the city of Karlsruhe, from where the Polish citizens returned home, taking with them letters of thanks from the command of the regiment. The 32nd Guards Rifle Corps operated in the main direction of the army. Our division was in the second echelon and had the task to develop the success of the offensive in the direction of Pinchuva. Artillery preparation began on January 12th at 8, and lasted almost 2 hours. The density of artillery per kilometre of the front was in the strip of the 5th Guards Army 183 barrels, and although low clouds prevented the aviation to support the offensive from the air, the onslaught of the Soviet soldiers was powerful and unstoppable. Forward units by 10-point, 00 broke through the first line of enemy trenches. Battalions of the regiment moved in the direction of Strozels, Kohari. In Dezislowice our column was joined by units of the 232nd Guards Artillery Regiment. The offensive developed so rapidly that the regiment could hardly keep up with the first echelon of the division, and in the first 24 hours we did not have to join the battle. At 20.30 we camped for the night in some folvarka. The ground was mixed with snow. The first large group of prisoners appeared on the road leading to our rear. All dirty, frightened, some without overcoats, in some robes, jackets. Convoys forced them to keep out of the way to give way to the cars. Far ahead here and there flashed the glow of fires. This fascists, retreating, burned Polish villages. The second night after the general offensive the regiment met in 10 kilometers from the river Nida. Forward units of the 5th Guards Army, breaking the resistance of the enemy, by this time occupied the town of Pincho, forced Nida and continued to develop the offensive on Częstochowa. It was sunny, frosty weather when the regiment's units halted in a pine forest near the village of Kopernia, not far from the river. Blue smoke from small fires rose above the glades. A regimental engineer of the Guards, Captain Emir Koshatarov, with a special group of sappers, was sent by me to scout the crossing of the Nida. About an hour later he returned and reported that only people could pass through the ice, and that the ice would not withstand vehicles, guns both regimental and attached 232nd Guards Regiment. "What do you suggest?" I asked. "It is necessary to make a log deck for the equipment, Comrade Lieutenant Colonel." In a few hours sappers made 2 log tracks on the Nida ice, and we crossed to the western bank without much trouble. Behind the river left by the enemy's strongly fortified line of defence, well-made trenches are lined with planks, dugouts are furnished even with some comfort. Apparently Hitlerites hoped to stay here all winter. And now all this was abandoned hastily. At the bottom of the trenches there were helmets, machine guns, rifles, shovels in the dugouts, even telephones were not cut out of the line. On the way began to meet surviving Polish villages. The guardsmen looked closely at the farms and localities. Around oppressive poverty, shabby wooden houses. From the headquarters of the division received a message that some scattered groups of the defeated enemy divisions lost contact with their units and remained in the rear of the Soviet troops, resisting in some places. One such group was found in the area of the regiment's halt in the woods south of the village of Melchow. Early in the morning I sent the 2nd Rifle Battalion and a company of machine gunners to comb the forest. A firefight ensued. Guards surrounded the desperately resisting fascists. The fight was hot, but fleeting. The survived 27 enemy soldiers and officers surrendered. Back in 1944, we got used to the fact that almost every day the orders of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief on the liberation of Soviet cities were transmitted by radio and published in newspapers before the regular reports of the Sovinform Bureau on the state of affairs at the fronts. And in the fall, the names of Romanian, Bulgarian and Polish cities also appeared in the reports and orders. In 1945, perhaps not a day passed that Moscow did not salute the valiant troops of some front, liberating more and more new settlements, and more often sounded the names of cities and towns with unusual for Russian endings Berg, Kru, Lau. This, of course, inspired us, the front-line soldiers, gave us confidence that Hitler's Germany would soon be brought to its knees. The war was already going on in some places on its territory. But Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary had not been completely liberated yet. On January 17th, our neighbours on the right troops of the 1st Belarusian Front, together with the 1st Army of the Polish Army, liberated Warsaw. It was the first liberated capital of a foreign country occupied by the Nazis back in 1939. And I and my fellow soldiers took this news with joy. After all, our regiment was one of the first to enter the territory of Poland and fought heavy battles on the Sandomir bridgehead. And on January 18th, together with other parts of the division, we broke into the city of Częstochowa, On January 20th, we learned that the Red Army troops crossed the border of Germany and invaded Lower Silesia with large forces. At last, what we were striving for was accomplished. We would beat the enemy on his territory. And our regiment crossed the German border the next day. In the handwritten regimental journal, this significant event was described by the commander of the 76 mm battery gun, our regimental chronicler, Guards Staff Sergeant G. F. Skiba, as follows: on January 21st, 1945, at 10 hours and 15 minutes, the regiment crossed the border. A small bridge over the narrow river Lechata separated Poland from Germany. There was a plaque by the bridge. It was written in fresh black paint. Germany, some of the guardsmen had written in chemical pencil. "We have come." The morning was foggy. Behind the dense haze, the outlines of the village were barely visible. It was quiet all around. Only smoking buildings that had been set on fire during the battles and were burning down before our eyes. On the whole way to the Oder, we hardly met any inhabitants. They were forcibly evacuated by the Germans. It was obvious from everything that people were driven out at the last minute. In the houses, even bowls of lunch were left on the tables. In the courtyards, cows were mooing tearfully, uneaten, unfed. For a day, the regiment passed about 40 kilometers. On the way, we met the first group of Poles freed from fascist captivity. On their sleeves, they had diamond-shaped patches with the letter R. One of the women told that all of them lived in barracks from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Worked on earthworks, digging trenches. They wore rags, ate 100 grams of black bread and drank ersatz coffee. With tears of joy, they welcomed the Soviet soldiers. The last stronghold, which was still held by the Nazis before the Oder, was the city of Karlsruhe. Apparently, it was simply bypassed by the first echelon of the division in order not to slow down the pace of the offensive. On the radio guards, Colonel Garin ordered me to speed up the movement and seize this settlement with a move. But it failed. Fighting for Karlsruhe lasted almost a day, and the Germans were knocked out of it only by the end of January 22nd. The soldiers and commanders of the 3rd Rifle Battalion were especially distinguished there, who in the night battle cleared from the Nazis almost a third of the city. It was not easy for us to break through the deeply echeloned enemy defences. Only on the 10th day of the offensive the advanced units of the corps reached the Oder on the front of Ohlau Brig. Our regiment, as part of the division, reached this boundary in a day by the end of January 22nd. We began to immediately prepare for forcing the water barrier. It was decided to make a pontoon crossing in the area of Michaelwitz. There I sent a group of scouts and sappers under the command of the assistant to the Chief of Staff of the Regiment for Intelligence Guards, Captain Zolotov. The group included Scouts Guards, Petty Officer Preidel, Privates Fomin, Basov and others, sappers, Senior Sergeant Samfarov, Privates Dratsiuk and Shumak. At dawn they approached the Oder. Following Zolotov's group, the 3rd Rifle Battalion stealthily approached the river. The ice on the river was crushed by explosions. On the water there was a squelch, therefore the crossing was fraught with considerable difficulties, especially since the width of the river in this section exceeded 400 meters. Sappers and gunners dragged to the place of crossing everything that was able to hold on the water: logs, boards, doors, gates. When the fighters began to cross, it was already dawn, and the enemy opened mortar and machine gun fire. High columns of water and ice were rising in the air. At 7:30 on January 26th, began to force the Oder units of the 3rd Rifle Battalion. Company under the command of A. Prolipko resolutely led the battle for the expansion of the bridgehead, cut into the depth of the enemy defence, making a daring raid on the enemy rear. Guardsmen managed to capture and deliver to the headquarters 23 Hitlerite prisoners. At 12:00 on January 26th, Oder was crossed by rifle battalions, a company of machine gunners of Captain Koryatko, artillery of the regiment, and the 1st Division of the 232nd Artillery Regiment attached to us. Infantrymen crossed the river on boats, manoeuvring between the ice under enemy fire. Artillerymen loaded guns on rafts. The first combat task that was to fulfill us on the bridgehead was the capture of the railway station Linden. Since the offensive area of the regiment was small, I decided to build its combat order in 2 echelons. In the first was the 2nd Rifle Battalion of Guards Major Steblevsky, in the second the 3rd Rifle Battalion, which at that time was commanded by the Deputy Commander of the Guards, Major Kuzmichov. In reserve, I had the 7th Company of the 3rd Battalion and a company of machine gunners. After a short artillery preparation, 2nd Battalion went forward, but was stopped in front of the railroad bed strong artillery and mortar and rifle and machine gun fire. I had to report this failure to the commander and ask him to repeat the artillery preparation. At 16.00 it resumed. This time the batteries worked to the glory. In 2 hours, when dusk began to fade, Steblevsky reported to me that the Nazis were knocked out of Linden Station, and the battalion made its way to the railroad embankment. First with his rifle platoon guards, Lieutenant G. A. Vassin broke into the station and ensured the advance of the whole company and other units of the regiment. The 3rd Battalion entrenched itself behind the canvas to the left of the 2nd Battalion, at the junction with the neighbouring regiment, but it was lagging behind, and our left flank was uncovered. From my experience, already considerable, I knew what trouble it threatens if the enemy bypassed the 3rd Battalion, and the Germans, Vifididizimo, decided to do so. As scouts reported to me, to the site of the breakthrough they pulled up to a battalion of infantry, 5 tanks and 7 self-propelled guns, and behind the railroad concentrated up to a dozen armoured personnel carriers with infantry. As I suspected, they managed to bypass the battalion. I decided to counterattack the enemy with the forces of the reserve company and a company of machine gunners to send to the rear of the enemy. By radio, the commander of the 7th Rifle Company was assigned the task and urgently called Captain Koryako to the CP. Swollen from fast walking, he breathed often and looked tired. Droplets of sweat rolled down the officer's large forehead, which he wiped away with a broad palm. "Karp Dmitrievich, you're hot. Take off your coat," I advised. "I think I will," he agreed. "Now sit down closer to the table." Guards Major Takmovtsev moved a chair to him. I showed the commander of the company of machine gunners the situation on the map and said, "We have consulted with the Chief of Staff and decided to entrust you with a very important and responsible task to bypass the encroached enemy on the left and strike at him from the rear, and will simultaneously strike from the front. The signal to attack is 2 green flares. What do you say, Karp Dmitrievich?" The captain moved the map to himself, took a pencil, led it along the railroad line and put a bold dot on it. "Here in this place there is a ravine that runs into a square grove. I think we can use it at night." "Well, go ahead," I agreed. "We're running out of time. If there are no more questions for us, then goodbye." My Chief of Staff and I went out after Koryako. From the frost and gusty icy wind, a slight chill ran through my body. Yes, the anxiety for the success of the case planned for the night crawled coldly into the soul. No sooner had we returned to the CP, as the communicator reported to me. "The commander demands you." I went to the machine. "How is the behaviour of the invading enemy?" Cold voice asked Colonel Garan. "It's still quiet. I decided to counterattack him at dawn from the front with a reserve company and from the rear with machine guns." "Good. Good decision. Report to me on the progress of the battle." I radioed Major Kuzmichov and informed him about Captain Koryako's raid. It pleased the deputy commander. Dawn was approaching, and there was still no report from Koryako. I was getting nervous, but then the radio operator blurted out happily, "Comrade Lieutenant Colonel Kuzmichov is on the line." A quarter of an hour ago, the excited voice reported that in the rear of the Germans began a firefight, heard grenade explosions. I assume that Koryako entered the business. "I think so. Now keep your eyes open. Do not miss the signal." After Kuzmichov came on the phone and Captain Koryako, he reported that the machine gunners stealthily reached the intended boundary, but came across a small group of Germans in the Volvark. We had to fight with them. This is how Karp Dmitrievich told me about it later. When we went down into the ravine, we hoped that the wind would calm down, but it turned out that he was walking here like a stray. We were moving fast. At the approach to the attack line, all the soldiers were falling down from fatigue, but there was no time to rest. Soon it would be dawn. The advanced patrol, headed by Scout Pochinko, approached the last house, but then our fighters were detected by a German sentry. He managed to shoot before he was captured by the scouts. Fascists began to jump out of the houses, some in their underwear. We opened fire, killed all of them. How many I didn't count. The first gave 2 green rockets and led my men to attack the German position, which was only 200 meters away. Our sudden blow from the rear caused confusion among the Nazis. And here and the 7th Company attacked the enemy from the front. Hitlerites soon came to their senses, began to fight back with fire, but it was too late. Part of them escaped. The left flank company of the 3rd Battalion took part in the counterattack against the invading enemy. In this battle, the commander of the mortar calculation of the Guards, Senior Sergeant V. Afanasyev, acted perfectly. 20-year-old Komsomol member, a native of Vologda, was of medium height, with a curly blonde hair, a savvy, cheerful guy. His calculation aptly smashed the enemy. Afanasyev was awarded the Order of Glory, First Class. I contacted the division commander, reported the situation. When I finished the report, Anton Prokofievich asked, "What do you intend to do now?" "I will continue the offensive." "Good, go ahead." And on Captain Koryatko formalized the submission to the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. More than once I have already mentioned the commander of the company of machine gunners, Guards Captain Karp Dmitrievich Koryatko. This brave officer had a difficult fate. Before the war he graduated from the Agricultural College, worked as a land surveyor in the Collective Farm and MTS, then was drafted into the army, served on the border with Romania, studied at the regimental school. At 4 a.m. on June 22nd the cadets were raised on alarm a Romanian regiment crossed the border, and Karp Koryatko together with all went into the first battle. The attack of the Romanians Red Army repulsed, but then began heavy days of retreat. In the Crimea Koryatko was wounded, got into an encirclement, but together with a group of fighters broke out of it. Through Perekop fighters sneaked into the southern steppes of Ukraine, then to Poltava. There Karp and his comrades joined a partisan detachment, and when the Red Army came one there, Koryatko was appointed platoon commander in the company of machine gunners of our regiment. And a few months later he took over the company. Karp Dmitrievich lives now in Poltava, actively participates in the military patriotic education of young people. Meanwhile, the 2nd Rifle Battalion combed the grove southwest of Linden Station and secured itself on the edge of the forest. The 3rd Rifle Battalion went to the right flank and continued to advance westward. The enemy was retreating to the area of the village of Rosenhain. I sent there a reconnaissance group consisting of 2 platoons of machine gunners and a platoon of Pole reconnaissance. There the reconnaissance group came across Hitlerites. A firefight ensued, as a result of which several enemy soldiers were killed and 2 captured. Scouts Guards Senior Sergeants P.S. Migon A.M. Yazov, Guards Privates Yael Sturpan, I. Kaitan penetrated further into the rear of the enemy. Soon appeared 2 German vehicles with infantry and a tractor with a gun on the trailer. Our fighters decided to ambush them. From both sides of the road on the Hitlerites were opened fire from automatic rifles. In a few minutes everything was smoked. The trophies of the guardsmen were 2 cars and a tractor. For resourcefulness and courage shown in this fight, all 4 scouts were awarded the Order of Glory, First Class. For 2 days in the regiment added at once 5 full holders of this combat soldier's order. Very rich in events front biography of the commander of the scouting squad, Guards Staff Sergeant Peter Semenovich Migon, a former collective farmer from the Khabarovsk region, where only he did not fight, starting from 41st. He defended Odessa and Sevastopol, being a Red Fleet on the cruiser Chervona Ukrusha. In Crimea he fought as a marine infantryman. Near Kirovograd he beat Hitlerites from Maxim, on the Dnieper from automatic rifle, and on the Polish and German land he became a commander of the scouting department. In addition to the Order of Glory of all 3 degrees, Peter Migon was awarded the Order of the Red Star. Overcoming the resistance of the enemy, the regiment took Rosenhain on January 27th. The Germans could not accept the loss of this settlement, and in the evening of the same day 2 battalions of infantry supported by 25 tanks went into counterattack. The situation was serious, and if not for the accurate fire of artillerymen and mortars, the regiment would have had a hard time. Artillery officers K.S. Kudov I. K. Koroshin, I. M. Lazarov showed high fire skill. The soldiers of the 2nd Battery of the 232nd Artillery Regiment, commanded by Guards Senior Lieutenant I. P. Frolov, hit 6 tanks. For the second time, mortars of 120 mm Battery of Guards Captain M.Y. Lishman distinguished themselves. Sergeants I. P. Netribo, A. V. Akinshin, N.I. Tikhonov, P. Kapustin, V.S. Shveyev, P.F. Rekin bravely crushed the fascists from their mortars. Targeted, massive artillery and mortar fire played its role. The Nazi counterattack was smothered. On the radio, I ordered the Commander II Steblevsky to raise the battalion in the attack. The fascists, losing soldiers and officers, began to retreat. Without giving the enemy a chance to recollect, the Guards stormed into the village of Etzdorf. For exemplary fulfillment of combat tasks on taking the station Linden. And then the settlements Rosenhain and Etzdorf, courage and heroism shown at that. The commander of the 2nd Rifle Battalion, Guards Major Alexei Kuzmik Steblevsky, was presented to the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. I will tell you more about him. Alexei went to war already 30 years old. He was born in the village of Zvenigorodka, Kiev region, in the family of a poor tailor, who in the Civil War died of typhus, suffered from this disease, and his son. Orphaned, he spent 2 years herding cows for the kulaks and harvesting oak bark for the tannery. But still he managed to finish 7 years school. Then he went to the Crimea, worked as a mechanic in a repair brigade in Yalta. In 1933, Steblevsky was drafted into the army. He graduated from the regimental, and in 1940 Border Guard School, became a junior lieutenant, and served at a border guard post in the Crimea. It was here that the Patriotic War caught him. He fought near Moscow, got into an encirclement near Vyazma, led to his group of 15 people with weapons. Alexei was appointed a platoon commander in a reconnaissance company. Then he headed a separate motorized reconnaissance company. At Rozhev, Steblevsky was seriously wounded. He was treated in Sverdlovsk. Then he finished the courses of improvement of command staff and got into the 97th Guards Division, when we were fighting at the Kursk Bulge. There he was assigned to our regiment. In 43rd he was accepted into the party. And now he had been commanding a battalion for almost 2 years. And how he fought. On the western bank of the Oder bravely fought and Gun Commander Guards Staff Sergeant Ivan Ivanovich Marinik, awarded by that time the Order of Patriotic War II degree and Glory I degree. For 3 days of fighting he and his squad destroyed 5 enemy tanks, 1 self-propelled vehicle, 2 machine guns, personally took 2 Hitlerites prisoner. For these feats he, as well as the commander of the company of machine gunners K.D. Koryatko and Combat 2A K.K. Steblevsky, was presented to the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Ivan Ivanovich Marinik was a native of Kazakhstan. Since childhood he learned hard peasant labor, then, when the family moved to Karaganda, began to work at the factory. The guy was drafted into the army in July 1941, but it so happened that only 2 years later he got to the front, to our regiment, and immediately he distinguished himself in the battles at the Kursk Bulge as a gunner. Then, at the end of the war, he became a member of the party. These 3 guardsmen of our regiment, Koryatko, Steblevsky and Marinik, were awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union after the victory in June 1945. A.K. Steblevsky lives now in Lvov, and I. Maripike in Frunz. At the same time I was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. But the presentation on me went later, in April, after the regiment successfully forced the Neisse River and broke through the deeply echeloned enemy defence on its western bank north of the city of Moscow. The first in the division forced the Spree River and came to the Elbe. We will talk about these battles ahead. In those January days, the machine gunner Red Army soldier S.I. Klevniuk became famous for the whole division. From his Maxim he repelled 6 fierce enemy attacks, destroyed 3 machine gun crews, killed the servants of the anti-tank gun. The political department of the division issued a leaflet about the feat of courageous machine gunner. In the battle for Etzdorf bravely fought as a partisan of the 4th Rifle Company, Guards Lieutenant K. I. Moiseev. His platoon was one of the first to break into the village. The communist went ahead, dragging the fighters behind him. Not once Moiseev had to lie down behind the machine gun to engage in hand-to-hand combat. The order of Lenin was marked by the feat of the company party leader. With great enthusiasm, all of us in these days took the news that the troops of the Second Belarusian Front came to the Baltic Sea coast and cut off East Prussia from the central regions of Germany. And not just cut off, but completed the encirclement of a large group of Hitler's troops in this citadel of militarism. In order to consolidate the successes achieved, the division commander in the morning of January 28th introduced the 292nd Guards Rifle Regiment into the battle from the second echelon. The division had to seize the railroad stations and the towns of Ohlau, Wels, Mansdorf. During the offensive battles in Germany, the Soviet troops more and more often began to make detour maneuvers to go to the rear of the enemy, and has already told about the night raid into the rear of the enemy under the Station Linden Company of Automatic Riflemen Guards Captain Koryatko. A day later he distinguished himself again, having bypassed with his company a group of Hitlerites from the rear and attacked it. The strike of the machine gunners on the enemy was so unexpected and overwhelming that the survivors of 65 German soldiers laid down their arms and surrendered. It happened near the concentration camp Gunsdorf, and our soldiers freed from captivity several hundred prisoners, Russians, Ukrainians, Poles, Frenchmen. That day I decided to visit the 2nd Battalion. I found combat at the NP. He reported the 4th Company is advancing in the direction of Peltschutz, the 5th and 6th Companies on Wusterbreeze. The enemy put up stubborn resistance, responding with heavy rifle and machine gun and mortar fire. We had to put into action the 3rd Rifle Battalion, which was in the 2nd echelon. But even he had a hard time. With the support of a dozen tanks, the Germans counterattacked the units in the flank. Then the commander, Guards Major V.I. Chaika, ordered his deputy, Guards Major as Kuzmichov, to stop first of all infantry. And this was accomplished by the forces of mortars under the command of Guards Lieutenant V.I. Kutuzov. Kutuzov, the company commander of the battalion. The fire of mortars was so effective and destructive that because of heavy losses the enemy forces could not break through to our rear, and the tanks, left without infantry, withdrew. 5 times more the enemy tried to counterattack the battalion, but all without success. For this battle, Guards Lieutenant Kutuzov was awarded the Order of the Red Star, and the commanders of mortar units Guards Staff Sergeants V. Afanasyev and S. P. Trofimov, Guards Senior Sergeants. P. Trofimov, Guards Sergeant M. Mukhametsyanov the Order of Glory, First Class. Guards Major as Kuzmichov was awarded the Order of Alexander Nevsky. By the end of the day on January 29th, the enemy was knocked out of Wusterbreeze. My observation post moved to Peltschutz and the CP in Gisdorf. At the same time, other units of the 97th Guards and the 32nd Corps took possession of Ohlau, Kressenheim, Bulhow. On January 30th, regrouped in the regiment's combat order, and we began the offensive in the direction of Rumsen. On the same day, the settlements of Rumsen, Kunert were cleared of the enemy. Behind the Oder, the locals began to meet more and more often. They hung white flags made of sheets and pillowcases on their houses, begging for mercy. I looked at the faces of the Germans, all pale and haggard. They seemed to evoke pity, but not anger. I know that the soldiers at the parking lots in villages and towns feed starving old men, women and children. Well, it is natural. Humanism of Soviet soldiers is well known. In the next issue of our regimental handwritten journal appeared a note written by Guards Staff Sergeant G. Skiba. I think that it will be interesting for the readers to know about the facts stated in it. In one village, about 25 kilometers from Breslau, when the column of the regiment was pulling into the main street, an elderly woman with a girl of about 12 years old hurried to the soldiers. The German woman shouted something, beckoning to the guards. The fighters surrounded her. The woman held 2 portraits in frames under glass. Skiba and his comrades immediately recognized who was in the pictures: Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg. The girl held in her hand a small, faded photograph of Ernst Thälmann. From the woman's confused story, the soldiers, with the help of our interpreter, realized that her husband was a member of the underground German Communist Party and that she had kept the portraits as a shrine throughout the war. If the Nazis had gotten wind of this, she and her daughter would have been exterminated long ago. The woman showed a white star, carved from bone, on which were depicted a sickle and hammer, said that it was the only memory of her husband, tortured by the Nazis in a concentration camp before the war. On January 31st, by order of the division commander, the regiment stopped further advance, consolidated on the line of Shimalei, Kunert, Rumsen, and went on the defence. I especially remember the battle at the approach to the village of Kunert. Here the Germans desperately resisted. I gave the order to the commander of the 1st Rifle Company, Guards Captain A. Prelipko, to take the village that the Germans desperately resisted. Prelipko to take the village by all means. The hot battle lasted several hours. We had to put into action the artillery battery of Captain M. Raikunov and mortar platoon of Lieutenant I. Smirnov. With their fire support, infantrymen broke into Kunert and strengthened in it. Hitlerites tried to repel the village. It was located on a dominating height above the terrain, and in 300 meters from it, there was a railway station. That's why the fascists made 12 attacks on positions of our company, and all were repulsed. In these battles distinguished themselves and the communicators of our regiment radio platoon commander Lieutenant I. Gorobets, Junior Sergeant N.G. Sychev, Red Army T. I. Galchenko, AF Kovtun. More and more often our guardsmen had to fight hard in populated areas. Indispensable in such cases were light 40 Kapiatki anti-tank guns, which successfully suppressed enemy firing points located in basements, house windows, attics. In the battles for Heinersdorf, the gun of the battery's Commissar of the Guards Senior Sergeant Pukliakov was attached to a rifle company commanded by Officer Baranov. When the soldiers of the group of guards Petty Officer Preidler discovered 3 enemy fire points from the attic of a 2-story house, they accurately marked their location with rockets. Using this target designation, Puklakov's team destroyed all 3 firing points with accurate fire. On February 2nd, in all units held talks about the 2-year anniversary of the victorious conclusion of the Battle of Stalingrad, in which our regiment participated. And I thought with bitterness that less and less there are fewer and less in the regiment veterans who have passed the harsh school of the great battle on the banks of the Volga. During the last battles we liberated many Soviet girls and young men, and even teenagers, forcibly taken by Hitlerites to Germany. Talking with them, fighters learned the bitter truth about fascist captivity. 12-year-old Alyosha from Zhytomyr region told. My father was a partisan. He was killed by a German. My mother was also killed. My sister was hanged. My grandmother was burned in her house. I was brought here in a barred wagon. I come from the Kiev region. Tatiana Mashovets, wiping away her tears, told the soldiers surrounding her. I lived above the Dnieper, where Taras Shevchenko lived. I don't know if my mother is alive. How many tears I cried for her. She trustingly put the tattered notebook in the hands of Guards Staff Sergeant G. Skiba. He, with great difficulty, made out the poems written in Ukrainian, apparently, furtively and hastily. They were excited and sincere, coming from the heart bitter and sad, with a longing for the unforgettable Batkivshchina. And at the very end of the notebook there was written during imprisonment in Germany in the town of Ogdiev, in the camp Mespir. October 1944. T. Mashovek. February 3rd. The enemy, concentrating up to 2 regiments of infantry, giving them about 50 tanks, moved in a counterattack on the positions of the 97th Guards Rifle Division. The thinned fighting order of our regiment was attacked by a battalion of infantry supported by tanks. There was a fierce battle, as a result of which Hitlerites managed to squeeze the 3rd Rifle Battalion and return the village of Shimalei. At 19.30, I received a report about it. I had to think how to repel the German village. I knew that the division commander for the withdrawal of the battalion, though forced, will not pat the head. Guards Major Chaika reported to me that the losses in the battalion are relatively small, but people are exhausted, and ammunition is tight. I consulted with Vasily Vasilievich Takmovtsev and Ivan Efimovich Poltorek. The Chief of Staff suggested to immediately counterattack Hitlerites in Shimalei by the forces of the 2nd Rifle Battalion being in the 2nd echelon and regimental reserve a company of machine gunners. While the Germans have not strengthened in the village, we will strike, Yuri Andreevich, he argued. The deputy commander was of a different opinion. He believed that the battle in the darkness will not bring us success, only people lost, caught in the fire of the Germans, who have probably already managed to create in the stone buildings machine gun points. In my opinion, it is necessary to conduct reconnaissance at night, said Poltorak, and at dawn to attack the enemy, preliminarily suppressing his fire points. It seemed to me that there is no reason to postpone the battle until morning. The Germans can really overnight greatly strengthen the defence of Chimilai, and to throw all available forces of the second echelon and reserve in a counterattack is hardly advisable. Anything can happen in battle. If the Nazis manage to squeeze our 3rd Battalion, then where is the guarantee that they will not be able to do it on the site of the battalion of the neighbouring regiment? I outlined these arguments to Takhmovtsev and Poltorak and offered them this option. Counterattack to begin at 24-00 after a 10-minute artillery bombardment of the eastern outskirts of the village, where apparently will be concentrated enemy firepower. Let from the front of the 5th Rifle Company, which will mark the attack, but do not get into the way. And the 4th Company should attack the Germans in the flank from the south. Company Otto Matichikov, bypassing Chimilai from the north, simultaneously with the 4th Company will attack the Nazis from the rear. Captain Koryako learned to do it well, I added. Zampolit agreed with my battle plan, but the Chief of Staff defended his opinion. Of course, I could just stop the debate, using the power of the commander, using the power of a commander, command Vasily Vasilievich to formalize my decision with a combat order, and that, as they say, put an end to it. But I realized that in such a case in the soul of my battle companion and closest assistant would remain resentment. Therefore I once again justified my arguments, and going to meet the Chief of Staff, moved the beginning of the counterattack 2 hours earlier at 22:00. I will not describe this night battle. I will only say that by 23:00 the enemy was knocked out of Chimilai. On the streets of the village the Germans left many dead soldiers and officers. 2 prisoners were captured. The 2nd Battalion took up the defence along the western edge. We could assume that the enemy will not accept the failure and will again try to attack our fighting order. Our assumptions were confirmed. By evening the enemy moved to the positions of the 2nd Battalion up to 300 infantry, which was supported by fire artillery, mortars and 6 self-propelled guns. But the counterattack was repulsed. And in total that evening and on the night of February 5th, the soldiers of the battalion and the company of automatic riflemen thrown to help him repelled 8 enemy strikes. At one moment of the battle the machine gunners met with the Nazis hand to hand. A young fighter, Guards Private V. Mikitin, who had already distinguished himself in battles and was awarded the Order of Glory of the II degree, fought with several Hitlerites who were attacking him. Suddenly he noticed that the platoon commander, Guards Senior Lieutenant A.G. of Stratov, was wounded, and 5 Nazis were running towards him. Without hesitation, the fighter rushed to the rescue of his commander. Mikitin arrived in time. One German was already a few steps away from Evstratov. With the butt of the automatic rifle our fighter knocked down the fascist, but he fell with him. This saved him at that moment. A machine gun line passed over Nikitin's head. The guardsmen continued to fight with 4 other Hitlerites. When comrades arrived, they found Nikitin dead next to the wounded officer saved by him, and near found 5 enemy corpses. A leaflet issued in the regiment told about the feat of Guards Private V. Mikitin. But even in the afternoon the enemy did not calm down. Combat 2 Steblevsky reported to me by phone that the Hitlerites, with the strength of up to a battalion with the support of 15 self-propelled guns, broke through at the junction of his battalion and the battalion of the neighbouring 292nd Guards Rifle Regiment, holding the defence to the right. Captain Radchenko's battery is fighting in the semicircle, Steblevsky said in conclusion. Hold on, combat. I will help with artillery fire, and Chaika will come to the rescue. Before I could say this, as the connection was interrupted whether the line was broken, or Steblevsky moved away from the machine. Takhmovtsev stood next to me and heard everything. His wide, thick, dark eyebrows moved to the bridge of his nose. There is a smell of trouble, he said anxiously. Vasily Vasilievich, give me the map. Chief of Staff unfolded the map and marked with a pencil the place of the German breakthrough. Allow me, Yuri Andreevich sneaked to Stablevsky. We'll decide with him on the spot what to do next. All right. Take a squad of machine gunners, a radio operator, and hurry up. And I'll set a task for Chaika. Takmovtsev left the control room, and at that time the communicator reported to me that at the apparatus combat 3. I picked up the phone, explained the situation to the major and ordered him to attack the enemy broke through in the flank. Take into account, I said to Chaika, your blow should be unexpected for the Germans. You will be supported by mortars Shakin and Kutuzov. And at this time batteries of Captain Radchenko repelled 2 attacks of Hitlerites and did not let themselves be surrounded. Having regrouped, the fascists attacked the battery for the 3rd time. The positions of artillerymen were shelled by self-propelled guns of Germans. They continued to fight back, but people became less and less. On one of the guns, the commander of the firing platoon, Guards Lieutenant Mikhail Vlasov, acted as a loader. He managed to hit a self-propelled gun, but was also hit by a shell splinter. The battery commander saw 3 enemy self-propelled guns rushing towards the gun from which Vlasov was firing. But the gun was silent. The captain, without thinking, rushed to it. His face was stung by splashes of frozen earth, and he ran as hard as he could. Not far away, the burst of an enemy shell made him throw himself to the ground, but he immediately jumped up and made a last throw. Grabbing a shell from the box and loading the cannon, he, still out of breath, shouted imperiously to the gunner. Farafonov hit the front caterpillar. Guards Private Gyanin. Farafonov fired 2 shells in a row and unwound the track of the self-propelled gun. The gunner of the other gun, Guard Sergeant Avetisian, shot down another self-propelled gun. But our 2 guns were also out of action. The artillerymen, heated up by the fierce battle, did not notice how Captain Radchenko was killed by shrapnel. We buried Iosif Davidovich Radchenko with all military honours on the southwestern outskirts of Olo. At the funeral rally spoke veterans of the regiment Perepelkin, Shachabak, Kovalov, Kodenko, Mitura. This day I remember with a special pinching pain after all. I met Radchenko in Stavropol when the regiment was formed. He had not been in any trouble for 3.5 years of war. And here you are on the threshold of victory, already on the territory of Germany. He laid down his head. We managed to knock out the enemy from our positions and at the junction with the neighbouring regiment. Major Takmovtsev reported to me by radio that the 3rd Battalion arrived in time and together with the 2nd decisively attacked the Nazis. In these battles our communist agitators deserved high praise. The commander of the section of the company of machine gunners, Guards Senior Sergeant I. K. Popov, showed examples of bravery and courage, Bolshevik flaming word, and personal example fearlessly enthused the soldiers to heroic feats. He was presented to the Order of the Red Star and soon received it. The same award was given to Senior Sergeant G.F. Skiba, who has already been mentioned more than once. And how many times the guardsman was saved by vigilance and resourcefulness. Here is one example. At night at the firing position of the 76 mm battery of Senior Lieutenant M. Lazarev, the gunner of the Guards Private Y. F. Kutz was standing at the post. It was a moonlit night, it was snowing. It was light, almost like daytime. Somewhere far away artillery volleys were rumbling. And here was silence. Suddenly Kutz was alert. A herd of cows wandered straight through the snow to the firing position. Soon the soldier heard muffled shouts. It became clear that someone was driving the animals. Apparently covered by the herd, the Germans wanted to get to our firing positions unnoticed. Kutz called the gun commander, Guards Staff Sergeant Levin, reported to him about his hunch. Levin and Kutz gave a few bursts from automatic rifles over the cows, and they quickly scattered. Now the Hitlerites, and there were quite a few of them, were in plain sight. The artillerymen opened machine gun fire on them. In the meantime, the calculations took their places and began to destroy the Germans with buckshot. On February 3rd, the Vistula-Oder operation ended, and 5 days later the First Ukrainian Front began another operation, the Lower Silesian. Its goal was to defeat the Lower Silesian grouping of the Nazis and reach the Neisse River frontier. Our 5th Guards Army was striking south of Breslau, in the direction of Görlitz. The farther we advanced into the depths of Germany, the hotter and fiercer became the battles for each settlement, for each stone building. The weather in February often changed. Frosts were replaced by thaws, sometimes by cold, freezing rain. The battle for a settlement with the almost Russian name Schwoika is firmly etched in my memory. That day the regiment was pursuing the retreating enemy, and it seemed to me that we were able to capture the village on the move, so to speak, on the shoulders of the retreating Nazis. The 3rd Rifle Battalion, moving ahead, was aimed at this. During the night it was on the outskirts of Schwoika, and I expected that at dawn the commander would report to me about the capture of this village. But it was not to be. All our persistent attempts to seize the village from the start had no success. Then I ordered to put forward from the reserve of the 1st Rifle Company and flank strike to knock down the enemy. But this maneuver was also ineffective. The enemy met the company dense fire, as well as the soldiers of the 3rd Battalion. My Chief of Staff and I were that morning at the NP on the heights, about half a kilometre from the outskirts of Schwoika, and we had a good view of the whole picture of the battle. Together with us was the Chief of the Chemical Service of the regiment, Guards Captain N.I. Kanin. Tall, stately, trim, he was distinguished by restraint, even some dryness, which in general is rarely peculiar to youth. Perhaps that's why some officers of the regiment jokingly called him academician. So this academician turns to me. "Comrade Lieutenant Colonel, I have an idea." "Come on," I said. "Tell me your idea." Kanin handed me a paper. I unfolded the sheet, and the Chief of Staff and I saw several icons depicting smoke bombs, arranged on the scheme of a long winding chain. "We'll put a smoke screen," continued the Chief of Staff, "will blind the enemy and cover our riflemen during the attack." "And what, in my opinion? Not a bad idea?" said Takmovtsev. "Well done," praised an Kanin. "And let's not waste time. Take, knock him, people, and get to work." Kanin gave each soldier of the chemical platoon weighty bags with smoke bombs and went on his way. And I contacted the commander of the 1st Company, warned them about the smoke screen, advised how to act under its cover. A quarter of an hour passed. From the observation point we could clearly see how the thick whitish smoke slowly drifted deep into the enemy defences. The men of the 1st Rifle Company swiftly rushed closer to the enemy and occupied the first 3 stone houses. Assault groups of guardsmen with fire from automatic rifles and grenades knocked out the Germans from attics and cellars, bravely moved forward. But soon the smoke was carried away by the wind, and the company was under fire from 2 enemy machine guns, whose crews were lying near the windows of one of the houses. The company commander, Guards Captain Prilipko, ordered the squad commander, Guards Staff Sergeant Daryev, to suppress the enemy's firing points. He quickly assessed the situation, gave the command to several machine gunners to divert the attention of the enemy, and himself with 2 men went around the house. All 3 of them managed to stealthily get to the building and throw grenades at the windows. The machine guns went silent. Prilipko again raised people in the attack. There was a stubborn street fight. The Germans offered desperate resistance, but the guards were stronger. Leaving killed and wounded, Hitlerites hastily began to withdraw to the west. I contacted by radio with Guards Captain Prilipko, ordered him to pursue the enemy and to take the railway station Gupstvitz. It took no more than an hour, as the company commander reported that the station was taken. We got big trophies, 15 serviceable guns, 3 steam locomotives, 15 wagons with ammunition. All guardsmen who distinguished themselves in these battles were awarded orders and medals. Nachkim N.I. Kanin received the Order of the Red Star. It was already getting dusk when the battalions of the regiment approached Teichlinden. Before the offensive, I once again clarified all the data about the enemy. The observation post was on a low hillock in the middle of a large field. It was cold. It was raining continuously. Water seeped into the headquarters dugout. At night, the 2nd Battalion of Major Steblewski began the battle for Teichlinden. The Germans resisted stubbornly, but by dawn it was all over the village, was completely in our hands. In this night battle courageously acted machine gunners. Guards Sergeant I.K. Matroy volunteered to eliminate a Hitlerite firing point, which hindered the advance of the infantry. Unnoticed, he reached the house deftly threw several grenades into the window opening from where the enemy machine gunner was firing. Taking advantage of the night darkness, a group of machine gunners, led by Guards Sergeant I.G. Goroshko, sneaked into the rear of the enemy and defeated the enemy column, which was on its way to reinforce the garrison of Teichlinden. Both sergeants were awarded the Order of Glory, First Class. 2 more full knights of this order became more in the regiment. In February, we learned about the Crimean Conference of the heads of government of the USSR, US, and Britain. Newspapers with the message about this event brought to the regiment headquarters by our regimental agitator, Senior Lieutenant Arsenty Korobko. He reported on the form and handed me Pravda and Red Star. The official communique, signed by Stalin, Roosevelt and Churchill, said that they considered and determined the military plans of the 3 Allied powers for the final defeat of the common enemy. It was also stated that our unyielding goal is the destruction of German militarism and Nazism and the creation of a guarantee that Germany will never again be in a position to disturb the peace of the world. I read these phrases and say to Poltorak, "Here, Ivan Yefimovich, how the Allies have spoken. And where were they for 3 years, when we were alone and retreating from the Germans and beat them? But they still opened the second front, Yuri Andreevich, objected Deputy Commander, and now they are advancing. What kind of an offensive? Vasily Vasilievich Takmovtsev intervened in the conversation. For 9 months have not yet reached the Rhine, but from the English Channel to him in a straight line of 300 kilometers, no more. They during this time and had time to drapen from the Kreutz in the Ardennes inserted his word, and Korobko. We'll live. We'll see how the Americans and British will continue to fight. I tried to summarize this conversation. One thing I know for sure, we will enter Berlin first. We can't do otherwise. Of course, we could not know then that, at the request of Roosevelt and Churchill, Stalin agreed at the conference in Yalta for the Soviet Union to enter the war against Japan in 2 to 3 months after the end of the war in Europe. Not so long ago, I had a chance to vacation in the Crimea and visit the very Levadia Palace, where the meeting of the Big Three took place. And I remembered how more than 40 years ago we discussed in a good burgher's house in a German town the results of this significant event. Battalions, relentlessly pursuing the enemy, occupied one village after another. Since the day of forcing the Oder, the Poli had already been engaged in continuous fighting for 3 weeks. On February 17th, the 3rd Rifle Battalion occupied the town of Nignitz, and the 2nd Rifle Battalion captured the village of Linz. Even earlier, on February 14th, the encirclement of the fortress city of Breslau was completed. It is known that there were created 2 rings of encirclement, inner and outer. Our division fought in the outer ring. The 289th Guards Rifle Regiment blocked the highway Breslau-Berlin. It happened on February 18th. 20-meter-wide concrete road, planted with stunted trees, stretched from southeast to northwest. The Germans threw into battle all their reserves, including heavy tanks Royal Tiger, to break through to Breslau. But all their attempts were in vain. At the site of our regiment skillfully dealt with the Tigers. Soldiers attached to us 104th Separate Fighter Anti-Tank Artillery Division of Guards Major I. D. Rudenko. Only for 1 day it destroyed up to 20 enemy tanks. 4 days we stood on this line, repulsing Hitlerite attacks, and on the eve of the 27th anniversary of the Red Army, the regiment was ordered to move to Kosendau. Here we met the holiday. At the rally, the festive order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, with congratulations and wishes of victory over the hated enemy, was announced. Speakers at the rally were Guards Major I. E. Poltorak, who had just received another combat award, the Order of the Red Banner, Guards Sergeant A. I. Bereshnoi, Chief of Artillery of the Regiment, Guards Captain P.F. Sushko, and others. In their speeches, the Guards recalled the way passed by the regiment, noted that the birthday of the Red Army is celebrated in the very den of the fascist beast, and promised to fight as before courageously, decisively and skillfully. And on February 26th, offensive battles began again. The regiment was ordered to capture the village of Wilmersdorf. The 3rd Rifle Battalion was to attack it from the north, and the 2nd Rifle Battalion from the west. By 15:00, the 7th and 8th Companies came close to the outskirts of the village. An hour later began the attack companies of the 2nd Battalion. The enemy stubbornly resisted, conducted heavy rifle and machine gun fire, hit by direct fire from self-propelled guns and tanks. Only late in the evening we managed to capture about 20 houses and clear from the enemy part of the neighbourhoods up to the fork of the road. Further we could not advance. On the night of February 27th, the Germans made an attempt to encircle and destroy our units in Wilmersdorf. About 200 Hitlerites, supported by 6 tanks, went on the attack. Their blow was repulsed. 3 tanks were destroyed by artillerymen of our regimental battery. But the enemy did not calm down. Having lost the night battle, he decided to resume attacks in the daylight. From the regiment's CP was clearly visible, as from the south to Wilmersdorf moved 4 vehicles with infantry and 10 tanks. What to do? Wait for the Nazis to pull into the village and stop them there, or try to meet them on the march, putting into action their reserve. After a short reflection, I decided to favour the first option. And here's why. It is unlikely that the reserve would have time to move to a line convenient for meeting the enemy, and it's simply impossible to do it secretly during the day. And in the village, where it is difficult to manoeuvre tanks, it is easier to destroy them by artillery fire, and our infantrymen were in hiding. My plan was supported by the Chief of Staff. I reported my decision to the division commander. From him, too, I got the okay. About the course of the battle. I will only say that this sortie also ended miserably for the enemy. He lost several dozen men killed and wounded and half of the tanks, and 2 of the 5 were hit by trophy Faust patrons. And here I have to make a small digression. During the battles on the Sandomir bridgehead, we got this trophy weapon in our hands. Then the Chief of Artillery Armament Nikolai Mikhailovich Kodenko and art technician Rostislav Alexievich Bazhanov came to me and proposed to use this new weapon, a reactive grenade, to fight against German tanks and self-propelled guns. Well, I said to these officers, it's worthwhile. Teach yourselves and teach people how to handle the Fausts. But no emergencies. For several days Kodenko and Bazhanov, together with gunners and artillerymen A.M. Zezhenshevich, P.M. Kravtsov, S.I. Strebkov, M.S. Skarupa, I.P. Tedovak and N.G. Krivashev, hiding behind the armour of the hit Ferdinands, got acquainted with the device of Faust patrons, learned to use them. And some time passed, and in each company there were fighters who had mastered well the trophy weapons that burned through the armour. Under the guidance of Kodenko and Bazhanov, guardsmen from combat units learned how to use it during training firings, using as a target the Nazi tanks that had been hit. I decided to supply sets of these grenades in the first place to all assault groups created for street fighting, and not only for shooting at tanks. Faust patrons were also suitable for penetrating the walls of buildings. This decision was approved by the division command. On March 4th, the regiment concentrated in the area of Elbe. I was ordered to occupy a defensive area up to 10 kilometers wide. The regiment by that time had a large shortage of men and firepower, and therefore it was very difficult to keep the defence at such a length. I reported to Cole. P. Garan that the regiment will be able to provide a density of fire per linear metre only about 1 bullet per minute. The commander replied that he would take this into account and would help with fire at the right moment. I had nothing left to do but to lay on the engineering improvement of the defence site. Dug trenches, passages, built dugouts, equipped for rest dugouts. The whole personnel of special units and regiment's rear were involved in the works. Fortunately, a few days passed relatively quietly, except for the fact that the enemy conducted rare rifle and machine gun fire. March 8th was also quiet. This gave our female fighters an opportunity to celebrate their holiday. The commander of the medical platoon, Maria Kukhaskaya, about whom I have already told in detail, came to the regimental headquarters and invited me, the deputy commander, the chief of staff and several other officers to the medical station dugout. All the girls, both medics and communicators who were not on duty, were gathered there. There were also a few female doctors from the division medical unit. We warmly congratulated our battle friends on the holiday, wished them a speedy return to their homes after our victory over the hated enemy. Then, after a festive tea, for which the chief of the department had allocated a fair share of trophy chocolate, there was an impromptu concert. This is where the danger which I had been avoiding all the years of the war, beckoned me. After the girls sang Zemlyanka, Katyusha, Blue Shawl, and we sang along as best we could, the doctor of the regiment's medical company stood up and began to read Konstantin Simonov's famous poem, Wait for Me. She did it in such a way, with such a genuine feeling that I involuntarily admired this beautiful girl, and for some reason she was looking at me while reading the poem, or maybe I thought so. I knew this nice doctor who had arrived from Leningrad for more than a year. Her name was Klava Zakharova. I greeted her at meetings, smiled, joked. I liked her. And she must have sensed it. And then the captain of the medical service burned my heart. I realized that I love her and no other woman I do not need. It ended up that not a month later, as Klavdia Nikolaevna Zakharova became my wife. Looking ahead, I will say that we lived happily with her for more than 10 years, until her death. She left me 3 daughters, and now my grandchildren have grown up. And if I talked about love at the front, I will continue this topic. In our regiment, several happy couples found each other. The first, if the reader remembers, were the commander of the sanitary platoon, Guards Petty Officer Maria Kukarskaya, and the deputy commander of the machine gun company, Guards Senior Lieutenant Nikolai Smirnov. In April 1944, after forcing the Dniester River near Tashlik, the regiment received a very young Nina Malikina, who was enlisted as a senior paramedic of the sanitary company. The brave girl not once distinguished herself during the most brutal battles, carrying the wounded under enemy fire, organizing their sending to the medical unit. For courage and bravery, she was awarded the Order of the Red Star. Assistant Chief of Staff of the regiment, Guards Captain Nikolai Levunets, fell in love with this brave, responsive, very pretty girl. She responded in the same way. Shortly before the victory, they got married. They lived happily until Nikolai Ivanovich's death. They have 2 children, 3 grandchildren, one of whom is graduating from military school and will follow in the footsteps of the grandfather frontline soldier. We can also rejoice for the happy couple of the combat commander of the Rifle Battalion, Guards Major Vasily Ivanovich Chaika and Nurse Katya, who took his surname. These happy couples went through the war and came out in peaceful life as families tested by fire. Their love was strengthened and hardened in battles, when every new day could be their last day. Probably, that is why their feelings were so strong that they remained for the rest of their lives. Love and war, strangely enough, turned out to be quite compatible. I would like to tell the reader about one more surprisingly romantic story of our regiment's engineer, Guards Captain Mikhail Kachachurov, and a charming Czech girl named Yaroslava. True, they met after the victory, when the regiment stood in a small Czech town. The young men fell in love with each other, and with the consent of Yaroslava's parents and the command of the division got married. And when Michael was retiring in the reserve, he asked the local authorities for permission for the Czech girl to leave for the Soviet Union. And the newlyweds left for Ashgabat, where Mikhail Kachachurov lived before the war. Yaroslava, who also became Kachachurova, found her second homeland here. They still live in the capital of Turkmenistan. Now, after this lyrical digression, I return to the front everyday life. The festive mood was overshadowed by an unfortunate incident on the night of March 9th. Before dawn, Vasily Vasilievich Takmovtsev woke me up and reported that a large reconnaissance group of Germans penetrated into our fighting order on the right flank of the 8th Rifle Company and captured a machine gun crew along with their weapons. This was a serious lesson for all of us. Once again, we had to explain to the soldiers the necessity of the strictest vigilance. Hourly inspection by officers of the headquarters of all posts of combat guard was introduced. March 24th, our division, together with the 95th Guards Rifle Division, began an offensive on a major junction of railroads and highways in the city of Strelin. At 10:00, a powerful artillery preparation began, and the regiment's units went on the attack. The sun appeared from behind the clouds. The improved weather allowed us to introduce our aviation into the battle, which throughout the day bombed the city. The fighting was hard. We lost many comrades in arms, but in 24 hours the town of Strelin was taken. Together with the regiment artillerymen of the 232nd Guards Artillery Regiment of Guards Major I.G. Rozanov acted perfectly. I will note, by the way, that on April 10th he was awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. I heartily congratulated Ivan Grigorievich, and he in turn congratulated me on the award of the Second Order of the Red Banner. It was the sixth and last combat order awarded to me at the front. On the same day it became known that our troops stormed the fortress city of Königsberg, and on the Baltic coast, after the troops of the 2nd Byelorussian came the soldiers of the 3rd Byelorussian. The situation of fascist Germany became catastrophic. While still on the march, I received an order from the commander to stop in the area of Machnow. On the night of April 13th, Colonel Garin arrived at the regiment and ordered in his presence to conduct a regimental tactical exercise on the theme forcing all units of the regiment of the water frontier. The exercise, as close as possible to the combat situation, was held on the River Beaver. The commander was satisfied with the actions of battalions, but for the fact that special units at the crossing did not meet the time, I was reprimanded. We knew that there would be decisive offensive battles and prepared for them with all seriousness. Party political work was actively carried out. The number of communists and Komsomol members increased. In the battalions were created full-blooded party organizations. In our regiment they numbered up to 40 to 50 people. In each company and battery were also created party organizations numbering 6 to 10 members and candidates for membership in the All-Union Communist Party. The political department of the division held a 2-day seminar of leaders of primary party organizations, and the secretary of the party bureau of the regiment, Major Borodzinets, gathered company party leaders and thoroughly instructed them. Komsorg, platoon, agitators and other activists were also given specific tasks. April 16th began the Berlin Offensive Operation, the final strategic operation of the Great Patriotic War. It was carried out by the forces of the 1st and 2nd Belarusian fronts, the 1st Ukrainian front, the 1st and 2nd armies of the Polish army. We, the ordinary participants of this gigantic battle, which ended 23 days later with unconditional surrender of Germany, were not aware of the idea of the whole operation, nor of its grandiose scope. It was after the war, when I studied at the Franz Military Academy, I learned what force was concentrated on the Berlin direction: 2.5 million soldiers, about 42,000 guns and mortars, more than 6,250 tanks and SAU, 7,500 combat aircraft. So among this armada, our rifle regiment occupied some, maybe, hundredths of a percent. But is everything on the front measured by percentages, and human lives, and the blood and pain of the wounded and maimed? The 5th Guards Army was advancing in the first echelon in the direction of the main blow of the front in order to reach the Elbe near Torgau, to separate the southern, Dresden, grouping of the enemy from the northern, Berlin, and thus to create conditions for the destruction of these groups separately. And our corps was in the first echelon. It was defined a strip of breakthrough of the enemy defense width of only 2 kilometers, that's for 2 divisions. This is what density of troops could provide the Soviet command during this final operation. To put it bluntly, this has never happened in the war. But the task was complicated by the fact that the offensive had to begin with forcing the Neisse River, and with this difficult task, after the most powerful artillery and aviation preparation, the divisions of the first echelon coped. We crossed the river by built crossings, by assault bridges, and in some places by pre-explored fords. A thick smoke screen was placed over the riverbed, covering the troops from enemy observation. The regiment concentrated in the forest northeast of Kebeln. Here I received the order to engage and occupy the height of 136.3. We managed to fulfill this combat task. The height was taken on the move. However, in one day we had to repel 16 enemy counterattacks. I had never seen such a thing during all the years of war. Hitlerites were climbing and climbing on the height, not counting with losses. But we stood our ground and moved on. The regiment broke through the deeply echeloned enemy defense north of the town of Moscow. Developing success, we took more than 30 settlements, including powerful enemy defense nodes Joltendorf, Fakokenberg and Ubigu. During the offensive in the area east of Mulkwitz, our column encountered a retreating group of Germans who fired on us. In the fight that ensued, part of the Nazis were destroyed, 20 were taken prisoner, and the rest fled indiscriminately. Our trophies: 3 machine guns, 30 rifles and more than 20 Faust patrons. By 13:00 on April 17th, the regiment reached the Spree River in the area north of Spriewitz. True, in doing so we had to beat the Germans out of the settlement Halbendorf. The commander of the rifle squad, Guards Senior Sergeant V.D. Volkov, was the first to break into the village, threw grenades at the basement of the house where the machine gun crew was sheltering, and thus ensured the successful development of the attack of his company. For this feat he was awarded the Order of Glory, First Class. The battle was hot. Ammunition of cartridges and grenades were used up quickly. We had to equip a cart with ammunition. It was headed by the commander of the supply platoon of the 3rd Battalion, Communist Guards Petty Officer Ibrahim Kurbanov. And when the cart pulled into the settlement, it was suddenly attacked by Hitlerites who came from nowhere. The petty officer was not confused. He and 5 travelling soldiers opened fire with automatic rifles, threw grenades at the Nazis. Under the cover of artillery fire began the construction of the crossing over the Spree. Together with the regimental sappers worked and the men of the sapper battalion of the division. In the area of the crossing the enemy was firing artillery, but the engineering work was not interrupted for an hour, and the crossing was built in due time. The night of April 19th came. Under cover of darkness we had to force the river. In the headquarters of the regiment, located in a dilapidated folwark, the order of overcoming the water obstacle was clarified. When about an hour was left before the forcing began, Guards Major Takmovtsev came into my room. "Everything is ready, Yuri Andreevich," he reported. "Unit commanders are instructed. Pontooners in place. Signals clarified." "Good, Vasily Vasilievich. Is it quiet on the West Bank?" So far the Germans have been quiet. On the Oder and Neisse was also all quiet, until we did not start the crossing, entered into conversation Deputy Regimental Commander I. Poltorak, and then remember how tight we had until we did not get a foothold on the bridgehead. I have no doubt that even here, on the Spree, the Germans will resist desperately, I agreed. After all, Berlin stands on this river. At 2:00, as it was stipulated by the order, the 1st Battalion of the regiment began to move on 2 pontoon bridges. The night was dark, the clouds covered the stars, and the Germans discovered our fighters when the advanced assault groups had already come almost close to the water's edge. They opened machine gun fire, but it was too late. With shouts of hurrah, Guardsmen rushed to the coastal shoal and fought with the enemy hand to hand. From the command and observation post of the regiment, equipped on the eastern shore, on a hill near the crossing, were visible only the strokes of tracer bullets and bursts of mines and shells. Soon Vasily Ivanovich Chaika reported by radio that the Germans were knocked out of the 1st and 2nd trenches, and at this time on the left bank rushed other units of the regiment, attached to us tanks and artillery. Contrary to our fears, the enemy this time offered less stubborn resistance than when forcing the Oder and Neisse. Whether it was because the Soviet soldiers were fighting in these days in the suburbs of Berlin and the near collapse of the Reich became quite obvious for the German command, or whether the Nazis had little strength on this section of the front. In any case, by dawn the whole regiment was already on the western bank of the Spree and continued to expand the bridgehead. And the next day, together with other parts of the division, we stormed the city of Senftenberg. At its capture we got rich trophies, many warehouses, including 3 warehouses with clothing, 8 railroad echelons, 6 locomotives, many cars and motorcycles. However, the enemy did not rest. His artillery fired indiscriminately at the city. One of the shells hit right in the window of the house, which housed the headquarters of the regiment. Shrapnel were wounded my deputy in the formation of the Guards Major Bragin, the Partog of the regiment, Guards Major Borozinits, Chief of Communications, Guards Captain Bilabokov. Borozinits and Bilabokov soon returned to the line, and Bragin could not be saved. The wound was fatal. In the morning of April 22nd, the 97th Guards Rifle Division, together with other corps units, began a new offensive in the direction of Durban, Torgau, Augsburg. On this day, in all units held meetings dedicated to the 75th anniversary of Lenin's birth. My deputy commander and I wanted to organize on this occasion a regimental rally with the Guards battle banner, so that in front of the portrait of Ilyich embroidered on it the soldiers could express their thoughts and feelings and honor his memory. But the combat situation did not allow this. The regiment had to go to the shore of the Elbe near Torgau by the end of the day on April 24th to meet the American troops. This was the task assigned to me by the division commander, and we moved forward forced march. At 16 hours, the Chief of Staff reported that the Elbe 30 kilometers. It is clear that we will not be able to get there on foot before nightfall. What to do? And what if we let the advanced detachment on trophy trucks? We have 5 of them, about 100 people in them will enter, suggested Major Takmovtsev. I agree. Here you will lead this detachment, Vasily Vasilievich, I told him. Make up a combat calculation, and take an artillery battery on the Mektiaga just in case. 2 hours later, Chief of Staff informed me by radio that the detachment came to the Elbe at Torgau, but our allies on the west bank of the river did not appear. At 22.30 I reported to the division commander that the regiment arrived in the specified area. Americans something delayed, Comrade Colonel, I added. On the left bank of the Elbe, not a light, quiet all around. The regiment rest, ordered the commander. The morning is wiser in the evening. But I didn't have to rest for a long time. At the beginning of the 3rd I was called to the phone. In 2 hours raised the regiment, Normenko came the familiar voice of Colonel Garan. Received a new task. We are here to replace the division Rusakov, and we go to Dresden. The route of the regiment will indicate the division headquarters in an hour. It was a pity, of course, that we did not manage to meet the Americans after all. Our regiment was the first in the division to reach the Elbe. But what can you do? An order is an order. And at dawn we were on the march again. And the first to meet with the reconnaissance group of the 69th Infantry Division of the U.S. Army were the soldiers of the 173rd Guards Rifle Regiment of the 58th Guards Rifle Division of the 34th Guards Corps of our Army. It happened in the middle of the day on April 25th. 2 days later, the order of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, No. 346, was transmitted by radio, which said the troops of the 1st Ukrainian Front and the Anglo-American troops allied to us, by blows from the east and west, split the front of the German troops, and on April 25th at 13:30 minutes joined in the centre of Germany, near the city of Torgau. Thus the German troops in northern Germany, cut off from the German troops in the southern parts of Germany. In honour of this historic event, Moscow saluted with 24 artillery salvos from 324 guns. The soldiers of the 289th Guards Rifle Regiment, with good reason, could consider that this salute in the capital of our motherland had a direct and immediate relation to them. Looking ahead, I will inform you that we had a meeting with representatives of the American troops a little later in Dresden, and I will tell you more about it. As well as about another meeting with veterans of the U.S. Army, held on the shore of the Elbe 40 years after the victory, in April 1985. On April 25th, the troops of the 1st Belarusian Front, having cut all the routes from Berlin to the west, joined northwest of Potsdam with the troops of the 1st Ukrainian Front and completed the complete encirclement of the capital of the Reich, which was living out its last days. In the battles in the Berlin direction, the soldiers of our regiment destroyed 22 enemy tanks, 12 self-propelled guns, 40 vehicles with ammunition, 20 guns and up to 3 000 Hitler's soldiers and officers. As trophies were captured 7 guns, 20 vehicles, 15 machine guns, 70 rifles, 12 warehouses with military equipment, 500 railroad cars. At the end of April, the enemy concentrated a large group of its troops north of Dresden to strike at the left flank of the 5th Guards Army. To repel it, and was transferred together with other divisions of the Corps, our 97th Guards. Here against the 32nd Guards Rifle Corps acted 2 German divisions, the 20th Infantry Division and SS Division Hermann Göring. These were the hardest battles for all our units, including the 289th Guards Rifle Regiment. In them again played an important role regimental mortars. The 120 mm mortar gunner, Guards Junior Sergeant A.V. Akinshin, was firing accurately. He accounted for several destroyed enemy machine guns, 2 transporters, during repulsion of the German counterattack near the villages of Biberbach and Kunzdorf. He destroyed up to a platoon of enemy infantry and 1 armoured personnel carrier. Together, with Akinshin bravely fought his comrades mortar guards Sergeants M. Mukhomedzyanov and SP, Trofimov. P. Trofimov. Only in one battle they destroyed 2 enemy firing points, 4 machine guns, 2 vehicles. All 3 added to the list of soldiers of the regiment who became full cavaliers of the Order of Glory. In the regiment, during the war years, they became 16 soldiers and sergeants, more than in all other parts of the division combined. And our troops were already fighting in Berlin, and Hitler's command, of course, realized that the war, so successfully started by them, is about to end in total collapse for Germany. And yet the Germans continued to fight fiercely. And retreating, the enemy left in the rear of the plough special groups to attack our units. As a rule, these groups hid in the forests. We had to allocate units to comb through the forests. Thus, in one of them, the guards found 3 groups of Germans of 20 to 25 people who did not want to surrender and shot back. After a short battle, they captured more than 24 Faust patrons, 70 hand grenades, 1 machine gun, several automatic rifles and 1 sniper rifle. Near the village of Kruppensdorf, the 7th Rifle Company was unexpectedly fired upon by a group of German infantrymen hiding in the woods, numbering up to 40 men. The unit engaged and almost completely destroyed the Nazis, and the survivors withdrew into the forest. We all expected that we would meet the holiday of May 1st in a relatively calm atmosphere after all. The victory was within reach. But no, on this day our regiment faced a heavy test. The day before, we knocked out Hitlerites from the village of Kunnersdorf and took the defence on its western outskirts. The night passed quietly, and in the morning the enemy, with the support of 16 tanks and self-propelled guns, began an attack on the village. The first frontal attacks of Hitlerites were repulsed. Then they changed tactics. They decided to hit our positions from the flanks. On the left flank they threw up to a battalion of infantry and 7 tanks, and on the right flank they concentrated another battalion and 5 tanks. The situation was becoming extremely tense, and I ordered the 3rd Rifle Battalion to withdraw to the highway road Kverse-Schönfeld. The 7th and 8th Companies moved back to the specified boundary. But the 9th Rifle Company and the 3rd Battery of the 232nd Guards Artillery Regiment were surrounded. The Germans managed to cut off all their escape routes. I took all measures to rescue these units, but it was not possible. By night, 2 soldiers from the 9th Company got to the regiment's location. They told me about the death of their comrades in arms. Riflemen and artillerymen took a circular defence, expecting to hold out until night and then try to get out of the encirclement. And they held out, repulsing more than one attack of the superior enemy forces. But the losses in the company and in the battery were great. The company commander, Guards Lieutenant F.S. Schweiker, was wounded, although he remained in the line. At night, the surviving soldiers rushed to the breakthrough. The soldiers fought selflessly, and they managed to push the Hitlerites, even to break out on the highway, but here they came under a strong fire of enemy tanks and infantry. It was one of the most tragic combat episodes in our regiment, and it was especially hard for all of us that it happened just a few days before the victory. It is still bitter to remember about it. But this hard and tragic for us day ended on a joyful note. By evening the news spread that the victory banner had been flying over the Reichstag for almost a day. We knew, of course, that brutal battles had been going on for several days in surrounded Berlin, but frankly speaking, we did not expect them to end so quickly. And on the evening of May 2nd, Colonel Garin called me. Yuri Andreevich. Anton Prokofyevich shouted joyfully into the receiver. I have just been informed the garrison of Berlin capitulated. Announce it to the soldiers. Yes, Comrade Colonel. I'll send control officers to the companies and batteries right away. Thank you for the good news. And in a quarter of an hour, spontaneous rallies broke out in all units of the regiment, despite the late hour. Soldiers, sergeants, officers shouted hurrah, and some, the most zealous, even fired red rockets. We had to intervene and stop this illumination, so as not to demask our positions. The commander also informed me that the regimental agitator Arsenty Korobko had been awarded the Order of Patriotic War of the 1st degree, and that he had been promoted to the rank of captain. I heartily congratulated this brave, enterprising political worker on the award, and gave him new field epaulets with 4 stars. On May 3rd, after artillery preparation with the support of 6 T-34 tanks, we went on the offensive in the direction of Ponikau. Guardsmen went on the attack with redoubled energy and indomitable desire to avenge the hated enemy for the death of their comrades from the 9th Company. Despite the desperate resistance of the Nazis, the regiment's units broke into the village and engaged in street fighting. 4 hours later, Ponikau was completely cleared of the enemy. This was the last battle of the 289th Guards Rifle Regiment. In the evening I received a call from the division commander Anton Prokofievich Garin. He ordered to transfer the defence site to the 41st Rifle Regiment of the 13th Guards Rifle Division and to withdraw the regiment to the area of the town of Ortrand by 6.00 on May 4th. There were concentrating parts of our division for the offensive on Dresden. On May 7th the regiment left Ortrand and arrived in Bowaldy. It was only 15 kilometres to Dresden. This major industrial and cultural centre of Germany, with a fight, took over on May 8th. Units of the 5th Guards Army, operating in the first echelon, including our 32nd Guards Corps of Lieutenant General A.I. Rodimtsev. The 289th Rifle Regiment was intended for a different task. I received orders from the commander to bring the regiment into Dresden and take under guard all buildings of historical value, including the half-destroyed architectural ensemble Zwinger, where the world-famous art gallery used to be located. Canvases from it were later discovered by our troops, and after restoration by Soviet specialists were returned to the German people. On the same day I was appointed military commandant of the city. At Dresden we received good news by the decree of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR for bravery and courage shown in the battles on the Oder bridgehead. The 289th Guards Vistula Rifle Regiment was awarded the Order of Kutuzov I degree. On this occasion rallies were held in all units, at which the soldiers expressed their gratitude to the party and the government for the high appreciation of their military deeds. On May 9th, the burgomaster of the city, accompanied by representatives of the local community, came to the commandant's office. "Herr Commandant," said the burgomaster, and my interpreter began to translate his words. "We congratulate you and in your person the Red Army on the end of the victorious war. We realize how much misfortune Nazism brought to mankind and your country in particular, and we are very sorry for that." "Thank you for your congratulations," I said. "We sincerely believe that a revitalized Germany will not allow a new Hitler to come to power. One is probably enough for you." When the last words were translated, the Germans smiled politely, but remained silent. And on the streets of Dresden, or rather, on the ruins of the streets, something unimaginable reigned on that memorable victory day. Our soldiers were firing automatic rifles, machine guns and rifles, launching rockets into the sky red, white, green, dancing to a harmonica or a trophy accordion. And when they got drunk, they treated the Germans with vodka and shared with them simple soldiers' food. And the next day in the morning I was warned by phone from the Corps headquarters that by 16 o'clock in Dresden on armoured vehicles and armoured personnel carriers will arrive one of the advanced mobile detachments of the 1st American Army, consisting of 30 to 35 people, headed by a major. The purpose of the meeting to clarify the demarcation line between our and American troops in the Dresden area. The detachment arrived around noon. Official matters were quickly resolved, and I invited the American soldiers to a friendly holiday dinner. It took place, in official language, in a warm, friendly atmosphere. And I say that without any pretension. It was like that. Yes, then we, Soviet and American soldiers, together rejoiced in the victory over fascism, and it seemed that our combat friendship would continue to grow stronger. However, as is well known, immediately after the end of World War II, the Cold War began against the Soviet Union. And as it turns out now, it began in the course of the Hot War. There are plenty of facts on this subject, and readers are well aware of them. I would like to cite only 2 of them, which I learned recently from Nikolai Yakovlev's book Marshal Zhukov, published in 1986. More than 40 years after the victory from declassified documents in the United States, it became known that since the spring of 1945, American military aviation conducted aerial surveys of vast areas in Europe, including those where the Soviet troops stood. These reconnaissance operations under the code names Casey Jones and Grounder Hogg were carried out under the leadership of General Donovan, head of the Department of Strategic Services, and General Seibert, Chief of Intelligence, under the Commander-in-Chief of the Allied Forces in Europe D. Eisenhower. Seibert smugly reported on the results operations were successful and provide us with the conduct of future campaigns in Europe. On Donovan's orders, his agents in May 1945 crossed the demarcation line in Germany and buried behind it 20 to 30 miles apart many radio transmitters that could be used by Western agents if necessary. A group of American and British generals visited Berlin after the signing of the German Surrender Act. She visited the units of the Soviet troops, was received by Zhukov. Among the guests of the Marshal was the U.S. Army General J. Patton. He wrote then to his wife, "Berlin upset me. We destroyed a good race and are going to replace it with Mongolian savages." And in his diary this soldier wrote, "I am not too interested in reaching an understanding with the Russians, except to see how much lead and iron it takes to beat them." Yes, apparently, for the American imperialists and their hawks, even then the Soviet Union was already an evil empire. I was gradually getting used to my new position of military commandant, but I did not have time to do it completely, because on May 13th, I received an order to hand over the affairs to the new commandant and the protected objects to the special units that arrived in the city. The regiment, having made a march, arrived in already liberated by the Red Army of Czechoslovakia in the city of Kladno, which is 60 kilometers northwest of Prague. There he joined his 97th Guards Rifle Division. Here I had the second meeting with my brother Nikolai, whom we saw on the eve of the new 1945 year, and it turned out like this. Somehow the Chief of Staff of the 32nd Guards Rifle Corps, Guards Colonel I.A. Samchuk, came to our regiment. That day I just received letters from my mother from under Romain and from Nikolai from the artillery regiment. I shared my joy with Ivan Anikievich, complaining that my brother was serving in our 5th Guards Army, but we had met only once. "So the war is over. Let's try to transfer him to your regiment. Let him serve under you," the Chief of Staff revived. "Give me his coordinates. I'll write an official paper to the Army headquarters." "So he will soon be demobilized, Ivan Anikievich," I said. "He is from the 5th year of birth." "Well, that's good. Together you will serve until he is sent home." Samchuk said goodbye to me, and a week later Nikolai came to the regiment. He reports in full form. Comrade Guards Lieutenant Colonel, Staff Sergeant Normenko arrived for further service. We hugged, kissed, began to remember our relatives, remembered our 2 brothers, Alexander and Sergei, who died at the front. Then I wrote a letter to my mother, and he wrote a letter to his wife Olga, who lived then in Voroshilovsk. And about a month later Nikolai, with the first batch of demobilized soldiers, went home. Almost 45 years have passed since that time when we celebrated the victory, and almost half a century since that Sunday morning in June, when Hitler's troops attacked our homeland. For 4 front years through our regiment passed thousands of people, soldiers, sergeants, officers. This book names only a small part of my fellow soldiers, both those who survived and those who fell on the battlefield. But when I had already finished the manuscript, one of the most active veterans of the regiment, Viktor Ivanovich Dudnikov, who now lives in Stavropol, brought me to Moscow a small list of my comrades in arms with whom he had managed to contact recently, and very much requested my voluntary assistant to at least mention their surnames in the book. I felt obliged to fulfill this wish, as a sign of respect to my battle brothers who fought under one Guard's battle banner. I will start with those who joined the regiment in the days of its formation in Stavropol, and who returned from the war to their native places. These are former Chief Petty Officer of the Sanitary Company P. S. Verteletsky, Orderly Private I. Zdorenko, Commander of the Supply Platoon, Petty Officer D. K. Ilchenko, Military Field Officer D. K. Ilchenko, Military Field Officer Lieutenant of Medical Service N.G. Samoylenko, Commander of the Staff Communications Platoon Junior Lieutenant N. Y. Stiller, Horse Driver Private I. D. Didenko and 2 one-man platoon. D. Didenko and 2 namesakes, Nakim of the regiment Senior Lieutenant V. I. Mezentsev and Mortarman Private V. K. Mezentsev. K. Mezentsev. In Leningrad lives former petty officer of the mortar company R.V. Belov. In the Kirovograd region rifleman Private F.Y. Kirpita. In Sochi petty officer of the company of machine gunners B. Y. Ponomarev. In Karaganda communicator Private A.S. Tabakov. In Kirovograd region rifleman Private S. Tabakov. In the Rivne region scout Private S.V. Smerkolov. In Chernigov region deputy company commander Lieutenant G. F. Redko. In Volgograd region mortarman Private I. Sterlikov. In Khmelnytsky battalion Commissar G.V. Marashak. In Tambov political officer A.F. Makarov. I am sure that apart from the veterans mentioned here, maybe dozens of former soldiers and commanders of the 279th Guards Rifle Regiment live in different places of the country. But, unfortunately, I know nothing about them. If this book gets into the hands of my frontline brothers, both mentioned in it and not mentioned, I hope it will not leave them indifferent. And I will be very grateful if the former Guardsmen will share with me their impressions, tell me new facts from the combat biography of our regiment. I would like to conclude this last chapter with this 8 verses. The war has died down. It has already become a long history. But it won't let go. Anxious memory of a fighter. From landmines and mines. We cleared our neighborhoods. But what kind of sapper? To mine our hearts. I think that both I and my fellow soldiers can ask this far from rhetorical question with good reason, following the poet frontline soldier Viktor Koshetkov.